Pleasant environment. Get ready for a healthy activity. Friendly atmosphere yields tremendous output. Poor surroundings. Challenges of today's world. Melting glaciers. Global warming is increasing.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अस्सलाम वालेकुम स्टूडेंट्स, कैसे हैं आप लोग? ठीक ठाक हैं? मैं उम्मीद करता हूं कि आप सब लोग खुशगवार मूड में होंगे और हैप्पी फील कर रहे होंगे और ठीक ठाक होंगे। Before I take you into the course today and the heart of the lecture, I would appreciate that all of you, for the time being, just forget about all the worries and everything and let us just concentrate on environmental psychology. So, can I have that state of mind from you? Wonderful, very good. It's always good to start your studies with a good state of mind. If you have refreshed your mind beforehand, that means you can easily get into the tough concepts, into the things that you are going to study, because at times you feel कि अब मैं पढ़ने के लिए जा रहा हूँ and this is going to be a boring activity and this is going to be something difficult, मुझे कुछ बर्दाश्त करना है और कुछ देर बैठ के लेक्चर सुनना है या पढ़ना है। अगर आप इस माइंडसेट के साथ जाएंगे तो आप इसी तरह से बिहेव करना शुरू करेंगे, लेकिन अगर आप अपना माइंडसेट चेंज कर सकते हैं तो आपका पढ़ाई का तजर्बा खुशगवार भी हो सकता है। And of course, the mindset with which we enter into a certain activity plays a great role. And this is the great lesson we have learned in the study of environmental psychology. If we can change the way we think about the things, we would actually change the things around us. And a teacher like myself, I'm trying to make the lectures very, very interesting for you as much as it is possible for me. And of course, I believe that environmental psychology is very interesting and very exciting field of studies for you. So, as usual, let us start our lecture with a brief review of what we discussed in our last lecture. Students, आपको याद होगा कि हमने अपने last lecture के अंदर शुरू किया था चौथा chapter, in which we discussed environmental and cultural variances. इस chapter के अंदर मैंने आपको बताया था कि हम कुछ इस किस्म की चीज़ों को डिस्कस करेंगे जिससे हम ये पता चला सकें कि environmental और cultural variances कौन कौन सी हो सकती हैं जो इंसान के behavior को impact करती हैं। हमने अपने लेक्चर का आगाज़ किया था with a small meditation exercise in which you had an interview with God, and we found out that when God is asking us different questions, those questions are actually about our responsibility. And when we talk about responsibility, that means it depends upon our sweet free will, that how we decide to break into action in a certain environment, in a certain scenario in order to achieve our objectives. Just like we are studying this lecture, and I told you at the start that if we can change our mindset, then maybe we can have a better control over the proceeding part of the lecture. So, mindset is very, very important. In our discussion, in our interview with the God, we found out that when we are talking about responsibility, responsibility is always related to certain resources that are given to us for usage. And when God is asking us different questions, He's asking us about our responsibility, that how we fulfilled our responsibility. And that means that what direct action that you took in order to resolve the situations, and how did you actually use your mental, personal, physical capabilities and capacities in order to progress through the situation successfully. So students, at this point of time, we also started discussing that is it the environment that is the deciding factor, or is it the human behavior that is the deciding factor? We have been discussing this relationship over the past few weeks during the course of our lectures, and we have found out that there is a mutual relationship between the two. And this mutual relationship, if we want to understand it better, we would always go on gradual basis, and we would be going on exploring different types of concepts, different types of strategies that would be helping us understand that how we can improve our understanding of human behavior in the environmental perspective. Students, हमने last lecture शुरू किया था एक case study से जिसका नाम था the My Lai massacre in 1968. इस massacre में मैंने आपको बताया that there was some US troops who were sent into a village in order to apprehend certain suspects according to the American army. However, these troops ended up killing innocent civilians over there. And while the massacre was going on, there came a helicopter on the scenario, and the people in the helicopter figured out that what is going on underneath is a massacre and that needs to be stopped. I told you that in this particular incident, two types of divergent behavioral patterns were observed from the same group of people, which was American Army. One type of behavior was extremely savage, and the other type of behavior was extremely philanthropic, which means that some people were trying to help the people who were in trouble, and some people from the same group were the ones who were actually being the reason to cause that trouble. So we extended our discussion at this point to find out that why people behave in certain ways, why do they act in certain situations in certain queer sort of ways. And based upon the understanding of this case study and a thorough discussion, we discussed the concept of conformity. Do you remember the concept of conformity? Yeah? So how do we define conformity? Do you remember that? Okay, let me remind you that. Conformity is defined as tendency to shift one's opinions or actions to correspond with those of other people because of implicit or explicit social pressures. So when we talk about conformity, that means sometimes, or rather a lot of times, people just start giving into the circumstances and what other people are thinking. That means कि वो अपना opinion डिज़ॉल्व कर देते हैं ग्रुप के ओपिनियन के अंदर. जैसा कि हमने माई लाई के स्टडी के अंदर देखा कि एक सोल्जर ने एंड आफ्टर दैट मैसेकर वाज ओवर एंड सोल्जर्स वर बीइंग इंटरव्यूड दैट व्हाई डिड दे डू व्हाट दे डिड. वन ऑफ द सोल्जर्स सेड दैट आई जस्ट लुक्ड अराउंड, एवरीबॉडी वाज शूटिंग एंड सो आई स्टार्टेड शूटिंग. डू यू थिंक दैट दिस वाज अ गुड इनफ रीजन फॉर द सोल्जर? ऑफ कोर्स दिस was not a good enough reason for a soldier to break into such type of action, because end of the day it is the person's opinion, and that opinion was being materialized in order to achieve certain objectives in the real life environment. And I asked you the same questions of what do you think about the soldiers? Were they bad guys or were they good guys? And it is very easy for us to say that they were bad guys because they did something bad. However, the mysterious part of the entire case study was that the soldiers from the same group were also engaged in helping out people. Of course, they were awarded Medal of Honors, and the soldiers of the Charlie Company were later tested in a court-martial. At this point of time, students, I told you that when we look around the youngsters, young ladies and gentlemen around us in Pakistan, we find out that most of the times when they are thinking and deciding about what careers should they choose and what careers should they opt for, they are actually being the victim of the same process that actually propelled the Americans to behave in a very savage fashion. And that process is dissolving your opinion into the opinion of the group, doing what the group tells you to do. That means that conformity is a very powerful phenomena. It actually engulfs people and makes them do things that they probably would not be doing otherwise. So at this point we found out that it is not only the group thing but also different types of situations in which people behave in different sorts of ways. मिसाल के तौर पर पाकिस्तानी स्टूडेंट्स, जब बहुत सारे स्टूडेंट्स कंप्यूटर साइंसेस की तरफ जाना शुरू करते हैं या MBAs करना शुरू करते हैं, इसका मतलब है कि शायद वो अपने पर्सनल ओपिनियन को कुर्बान कर रहे हैं ग्रुप के ओपिनियन के ऊपर. Because maybe the popular fashionable standards might be that a youngster who's graduate in computer science or who's graduate in business is a very capable, intelligent young man, and then people start thinking that all of these people who have these beautiful, these flashy, impressive degrees will be getting very nice jobs out there in the market. Then everybody starts riding on the bandwagon. However, when we get into the profession, we find out that in order to excel through the profession, you need professional excellence. And professional excellence means that you love what you do. And if you don't love to do computer science and if you don't love to do MBA, then the kind of job that you will get, you will actually not be doing what you love to do. And in that case, this is a sure shot formula to become a mediocre for the rest of your life. So students, why do these students behave in such a way that they will ride on the bandwagon and do what other people are doing? We found out that conformity is such a process that impacts people's minds in such powerful ways that they start doing things that they probably would not otherwise do. I also told you about Ash's experiment, in which 7 subjects were taken and they were shown 2 sets of lines. One was a standard line, and then there was comparison lines, 3 comparison lines, and subjects were asked to find out that which of the comparison lines is exactly the way the standard line is. I told you that in the experiment there were 7 subjects taken in one trial, and out of those 7 subjects, 1 was real subject and the other were confederates, which means that the other were trained people. They were already told before the experiment that what is expected from them was to change the opinion of the 6th subject, who was actually the real subject. And while the subject could easily see that which line matches the other line from the comparison lines, the group, the confederates, would gradually start changing his opinion. And we found out that there were 37% of the subjects who actually conformed to the opinion of the group, even despite the fact that they could easily see that which of the comparison lines actually matches with the standard line. So at this experiment's culmination, we discussed the Miley case once again and the students' bandwagon riding case once again, in order to find out that how the process of conformity can help us, that how social environment impacts people to behave, act, and feel in certain ways. Students, we discussed with reference to conformity that there are certain conditions in which conformity is a more likely response from the people. इस एक्सपेरिमेंट में ये पता चलाया गया कि जब लोग मुख्तलिफ ग्रुप के अंदर बहुत ज़्यादा एग्रीमेंट होता है किसी एक सर्टेन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू की तरफ, तो लोग अपना पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू चेंज करना शुरू कर देते हैं इन द लाइट ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर एग्रीमेंट that has been reached between the group, which means that if most of the people in the group are 100% agreeing that one thing is right, then chances are that the odd man out who might be thinking the other way, वो भी अपने point of view को group thinking के ऊपर कुर्बान कर सकता है. And at this point, it is very important to discuss the phenomena that why people shift their point of view and start to tailor their points of views in the lights and dictates of the points of views of the group. It only happens in such a way. When a certain individual has a certain point of view that is against the group's point of view, he is facing a very stressful situation, because the group thinks in another direction and the individual thinks in another direction. If he is harboring 2 thoughts at the time, then that means that there is no unified thinking, there is no unity in his thinking. And when there is this lack of unity in the thinking, this becomes stressful for the individual. And stress is always physiologically painful. Eventually, the stress reaches up to a point where the individual finds out that he has to do at least 2 things. Number 1 is either he changes his point of view, and number 2 is he changes the point of view of the group. So these people are the ones who have changed their point of view in the light of the group's point of view, because the stress of having a different point of view was becoming so physiologically painful that they eventually decided to give in and cave in. One of the Miley soldiers who was interviewed later on, he said, I looked around, everybody was shooting, so I started doing the same thing. He actually sacrificed his own point of view, his own opinion about the situation, and he caved in, he gave in to what the entire group was doing. It happens a lot of times. However, in most of the cases, you will always find at least one person who would like to go against the dictates of the group or the dictates of the norms. And these people can be called dissenters. In the ashes experiment, it was found that the subjects who were exposed to dissenters, their level of conformity significantly was reduced. कुछ ऐसे सब्जेक्ट्स लिए गए थे इस एक्सपेरिमेंट में जिनके साथ एक कलर एक्सपेरिमेंट किया गया था, जिसमें उनको एक्सपोज किया गया ऐसे लोगों के साथ जो ग्रुप ओपिनियन से डाइसेंट करते थे. So these subjects had the exposure of certain dissenters in the group, and they just picked it up from them. In fact, they found out that they could also do the same thing. And when they went for the ashes experiment, the standard line and the comparison lines experiment, they were the ones who actually started dissenting rather than conforming, because what they started seeing was actually reality for them, and they believed in that reality, and they thought that what the group is telling them is not according to the reality that they are perceiving. Now, these people would have also gone through the stress of changing their point of view, through the stress of having two different points of views at one time, that my entire group is telling me one thing and I am thinking about one thing. And then, since this gentleman or the lady, the subject of the experiment, was exposed to dissenters, he just figured out that I can dissent. I can actually change the group's point of view. And he just raised up and he said that now the lines are not the similar as the group is thinking. So it was found that the people, the subjects who were exposed to dissenters, their level of conformity had been significantly reduced. In another version of the experiment, the subjects were given the facility to remain anonymous, which means that they were made to sit in their separate cabins where they could press the buttons in order to explain, in order to point out what they thought about the lines. It was found out that subjects who were given the facility to remain anonymous, they actually did not confirm as much as the other subjects did. This point is also understandable in the light of the principles of conformity, that when people are actually away from the pressure of the group, their contact with their internal original opinion becomes intact, and they can probably get the power to express their point of view. They can actually go away from the group. Now, this is based upon the proximal distance, because the distance between the individual and the group is more on the physical basis as well as on the mental basis. And based upon this distance, the subject is not being that much pressurized by the group thing. Another point of importance here is self-confidence versus self-doubt. It has been found out that the people who are having a lot of self-confidence, they are headstrong, they would always be the ones to go against the groups. We have found out in a lot of leadership studies that have been done upon a lot of leaders that have came into this world, that most of the leaders actually start with a vision. लीडरशिप की स्टडीज़ के अंदर ये फाइंड आउट किया गया है कि लीडर्स के पास हमेशा एक बेसिक विजन होता है. ये बेसिक विजन दरअसल क्या चीज़ है? लीडर्स का बेसिक विजन उनका एक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू होता है जिसके मुताबिक वो दुनिया को देखते हैं और जिसके मुताबिक वो देखते हैं कि हमारे लोगों को इस तरह से होना चाहिए, और वो अपनी विजन और अपने बेसिक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू के इर्द गिर्द लोगों को गैदर अप करते हैं. इट हैज़ बीन सीन that most of the times when leaders actually start the entire thing, they are not popular, a lot of people don't know them, and they have a very different point of view from what most of the people out there think. But these are the people who are self-confident, who are headstrong, and they would go engage with people and they would try to change their point of view instead of changing their own points of views. And that is how they get out of the bandwagon and they probably start a brand new bandwagon. We discussed the example of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was the Nazi leader who actually waged World War II. This gentleman had a personal vision about the way the Germans should act, about the way the Germans should be perceived in the entire world. He had a certain vision about his people, and he gathered up all of his people around that particular vision. And when he actually started out, he did not find a lot of people who would be listening to him, but he persisted, he stayed headstrong and self-confident, and people started gathering around him. And that's how he took his entire nation in a hype, in a frenzy, and he was leading all of the people towards the war. What was the most important point about Hitler's personality was that he had the power at that time to go against, to come up with a new vision, to come up with a new idea, and convince the people to gather up around that new idea. While a lot of people who were not thinking about Hitler's ideas, they were giving in to what the group was thinking. Hitler gave them a new vision and he gathered people around them. A study was carried out in an American university in which the students were asked that if they were existing in Adolf Hitler's times, would they be the members of the Nazi Party? Would they actually become active members of Hitler's party and help Germany through the World War II and help Germany become the great nation like the way Hitler envisioned? A lot of students said that they would not have done that. They would have practiced their own personal vision and tested accordingly. However, based upon our understanding of the conformity principle, it can now be understood that probably most of these students would have become active members of the Nazi Party because they could have given into the group thinking and they could have dissolved their personal opinion into the opinion of the group. Because one of the most important factors that leaders or dictators can probably use is that they have usually a very bad treatment available for the dissenters. Like we discussed in the Ashes experience, that people who were exposed to dissenters, उनका level of conformity बहुत कम था. लेकिन ऐसे लोग जो dissenters के जिनका exposures नहीं था dissenters का, उनके अंदर level of conformity ज़्यादा था. And what we see in the Nazi Party's success in those days and Hitler's success, that eventually there came a point where dissenters were treated very, very badly. And there was an entire intelligence network that were helping out the Nazi Party to direct people towards certain direction. And that's how most of the people became the members of the Nazi Party, and they actually became the part and parcel of the Nazi movement. So it has been seen that when people are not exposed to the dissenters or the dissenters are treated badly, then people would think that what the group is thinking is good enough. Because first of all, there is a lot of psychological pressure on an individual to embrace into the group's thinking. However, when there is physical pain or negative consequences attached with the possibility of dissension, then this would be an extraordinary push towards having people professing into certain points of views, into certain ideas and beliefs. So students, this was where we discussed that how self-confident people would actually conform less than the people who are having low self-esteem. What are the reasons for conformity? The reasons of conformity, like we discussed before, is that a person yields his internal opinion to the outward opinion, to the outward reality that is the opinion of the group. And this process happens through two further processes, which is identification and internalization. In identification, a person identifies himself with a certain group, and it has been seen that any group that has been constituted ever in the world, there are certain rules and regulations that every member of that group has to profess. If you have any doubts upon that, you can actually start thinking about the group of your friends. Why? You people are friends with each other. There are certain characteristics, certain things that are common between you. And when you sit as a group of friends, there are certain things that are acceptable to everyone. Now, a new gentleman arrives in the group, he might not like he might not be having the same ideas as the entire group of your friends be having. Then he has to either accept ideas of your group of friends, or he has to create an idea that is so powerful that the entire group of friends actually yields into that gentleman's idea. So whenever the group is formed, there are certain rules and regulations and certain certain characteristic ways of perception within that group, and the members have to profess into those characteristic ways of perception. So this way an individual identifies himself or herself with a certain group. After people identify with a certain group, they go through the process of dissonance, which means that they have personal ideas, and those personal ideas sometimes come at loggerheads with the ideas of the group. There is an opposition, and eventually the personal ideas usually dissolve into the group thing. And when such thing happens, this process is called internalization. At this point, students, there is an important question that I would like to ask you. जब आप दूसरे लोगों को अंडरस्टैंड करने की कोशिश करते हैं और आप ये एक्सप्लेन करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि कोई साहब या कोई खातून किस तरह से बिहेव करती हैं और क्यों करती हैं, तो आप यूजुअली क्या चीज़ रीड करने की कोशिश करते हैं? क्या आप अपनी परसेप्शंस को किसी जजमेंट के ऊपर बेस करते हैं? ओके, लेट मी एक्सप्लेन इट टू यू इन मोर सिंपलर टर्म्स. मिसाल के तौर पर आप किसी जगह पर पहली दफ़ा जाते हैं. Let us suppose that your friend has invited you on a party, and you go on that party and you meet with a lot of people जिनसे आपने पहले कभी मुलाकात नहीं की. अब आप उन लोगों को देख रहे हैं, उनसे बातचीत भी हो रही है, कुछ लोगों से बातचीत कर रहे हैं, कुछ लोगों को आप सिर्फ ऑब्ज़र्व कर रहे हैं. जब आप लोगों को ऑब्ज़र्व करते हैं तो आपके जहन में कुछ ओपिनियंस बनना शुरू होते हैं लोगों के बारे में कि ये साहब या खातून इस तरह से इस वजह से बिहेव कर रहे हैं. अमूमन हम काफ़ी ज़्यादा जजमेंट्स देते हैं लोगों के बिहेवियर के बारे में in order to explain it to us, in order to clarify it to us that why a certain person is behaving in a certain way. Matter of fact, what we are doing in such a scenario is that we are trying to match the existing information about the people with the previous information that exists in our mind about such people. And based upon that previous information, we are passing certain judgments that a certain person is behaving in a certain way. Our perceptions and judgments are significantly influenced by the assumptions we make about the person's internal state. This is the field of attribution theory. Now, I said that our perceptions are significantly based upon our judgment of a person's internal state. मिसाल के तौर पर अगर कोई साहब आपके साथ कोई शरारत करते हैं या he throws a wisecrack on you, you might come to start thinking that this gentleman is actually a bad guy because he is trying to demean you or he's trying to embarrass you in front of the crowd. Or a certain person comes to you and he just becomes friendly, gives you a nice shake hand, introduces himself and starts talking to you. You might say that he's a nice guy because he's behaving like a nice guy. And when we look at both of these people, we try to see that what is the state that is inducing this type of behavioral pattern. If this type of behavioral pattern, and you come to find out that this type of thing is being done by the person because he internally actually plans to do that to you, then you would actually consider that person bad. However, if you come to think that that person was doing just throwing a joke in order to make everybody laugh in the party and make you laugh also in the party, then you might come to interpret the same thing from a very different point of view. Attribution theory is the theory that helps us understand that how do we explain people's behavior and how do we come to attribute people's behavior with their internal states. Let me give you an example. Let us suppose that there is a girl, her name is Saira, and she is a student of Bachelor's in Business Administration in a good university. Saira joined this school after she got good marks in her intermediate exams. Saira comes from a rather rural background where she was raised up in a rural-oriented family in conventional ways. When she comes to join this new business school, she finds out that the business school is extremely modern and extremely liberal. And she finds out that most of the students in the business school are usually practicing their own free will and it is emphasized in the school that students actually express their points of views. Saira was probably raised in a conventional way, so she probably feels shy to express herself in this kind of environment. Matter of fact, she probably is taking time before this type of capability would actually take strength into her. However, if you capture Saira in the class at this particular moment, you might find out that while the other people are talking, Saira usually remains silent. And Saira usually tries to hold her point of view. And you may easily say that Saira is a very shy girl. My question to you is Saira really a shy girl? Is it the way she's made up? Or is Saira behaving in a shy way in a certain environment? Yes, the answer is right. Saira is probably behaving in the same way in a certain environment. However, if you capture Saira sitting with her other friends, you might find out that Saira is very talkative. She always expresses her points of views, and she's not shy at all. So, when you would capture Saira in a scenario where she's behaving in a shy way, you would say that Saira is a shy person. She's simply shy. And if another person has captured Saira while she is sitting with her family or she's sitting with her friends that she's quite comfortable with and she's talking and expressing her points of views, the other person might say that Saira is very intelligent and a very confident girl. The question is, what exactly Saira is? Attribution theory tells us that a lot of times that when we are trying to understand and explain people's behavior, we are actually making extremely wrong judgments, and those judgments are actually based upon our assumptions about the people. Let me tell you what attribution theory really is about. Attribution theory has been developed to explain how we judge people differently depending upon the meaning we attribute to a given behavior. By observing behavior, we attempt to determine whether the behavior is internally caused or externally caused. Like I said before, it is very, very important for us when we are judging people to find out that whether a person is doing something because he is like that or whether a person is doing something because environment made him do something. When we say कि एक साहब ने इस वजह से किया कि वो शायद हैं ही इसी टाइप के, तो इसका मतलब है कि हमने एक इंटरनल कॉज जो उनकी शख्सियत के अंदर है आइडेंटिफाई कर ली है, जो रीज़न है उनके बिहेवियर पैटर्न की. ऐसी सूरत हाल के अंदर हम एट्रीब्यूट करते हैं उनके बिहेवियर को उनके इंटरनल स्टेट के साथ, एंड वी एक्चुअली कंसिडर दोज पीपल, वी एक्चुअली पास very, very strong judgments about those people. When somebody internally, intentionally is doing something, then that means he or she is actually responsible for that, because that person is like that. However, like we discussed in the last lecture, sometimes it happens that people in certain situations behave in a weird sort of way. बाज़ औक़ात बहुत shy लोग किसी जगह पर बहुत confidently behave करते हैं. बाज़ औक़ात ordinarily बहुत peaceful रहने वाले लोग किसी जगह पर बहुत ज़्यादा aggressive हो जाते हैं. And when you capture them in an aggressive mode, you might come to say that this gentleman is very, very aggressive. However, it is important for you to see that that aggressive behavior is internally caused or externally caused. If that behavior is externally caused according to your perception, then you might say that this gentleman is behaving aggressively only in this particular situation. However, if you come to think that this behavior is internally caused, then you would say that this gentleman is aggressive. In either case, your perception might be wrong because you do not have complete information on that. Based upon the attribution theory, we have the concept of fundamental attribution error. Fundamental attribution error means that we are always making wrong judgments based upon our assumptions. Let us see what we mean by fundamental attribution error. Understanding the influence of external factors and overestimating the influence of internal factors. That is the fundamental attribution error. जब हम लोगों के बिहेवियर को एक्सप्लेन करते हैं और उसके ऊपर जजमेंट देने की कोशिश करते हैं, तो हम एक्सटर्नल फैक्टर्स को ओवर एस्टिमेट करते हैं और इंटरनल फैक्टर्स को अंडर एस्टिमेट करने की कोशिश करते हैं. For example, assuming that a person is late all the times because she or he is not interested in the work, rather than finding out that the shift starts when the parking is totally full. एक साहब जो हमेशा लेट आते हैं, हम उनके बिहेवियर को इस तरह से एक्सप्लेन कर सकते हैं कि क्योंकि ये हमेशा ही लेट आते हैं, इसलिए something is wrong with this person, which means that the behavior is internally caused. However, there could be a major reason for that person to be late every day. शायद उस टाइम पे पार्किंग के अंदर कोई इश्यूज हों या पार्किंग प्रॉब्लम्स हों. There could be so many reasons that this person might be coming late every day. However, instead of finding out that why this person comes late every day and helping this person out, we might simply build up an assumption without getting enough information that this person is a habitual latecomer. This person is a lousy person. He just wants to drift away from the responsibility. So students, like I told you, fundamental attribution error is an error that we commit when we try to underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate the influence of internal factors. मिसाल के तौर पर एक साहब अपने एग्ज़ाम में बहुत अच्छे नंबर्स लेके आते हैं. शायद आपको वो साहब पसंद नहीं हैं या शायद उनका पास्ट रिकॉर्ड इतना अच्छा नहीं है, इसलिए आप ये कह सकते हैं कि ये साहब अच्छे नंबर्स इम्तहान में इस वजह से लेके आए कि शायद इस दफ़ा इम्तहान ही बहुत आसान आए थे, या शायद ये साहब ने नकल की होगी, या शायद तुक्के से ये अच्छे नंबर ले गए हैं. सो वी अंडर एस्टिमेट एंड ओवर एस्टिमेट द इन्फ्लुएंस of internal and external factors. This is the fundamental attribution error that we are constantly making. Let me tell you another concept over here which actually comes out of our understanding of fundamental attribution error, and this is called self-serving bias. Self-serving bias, like I told you in the previous example, it means that we attribute success to internal factors and failure to external factors. Like they say, nothing succeeds like success, and failure has many excuses. Nothing succeeds like success. When a person is successful, that person is successful, and that means that success becomes part of that person. And we do not say that this person is successful because of certain external factors. We simply say that that person is successful, and we come to think that that person might be very, very intelligent. So self-serving bias is actually attributing success to internal factors and failure to external factors. You might come to say that I failed because I faced these difficulties. And if you are successful, you would say, I am successful because I worked very, very hard for it. So we try to tailor the opinion according to our choice. We try to tailor our perception of the situation in such a way that we appear to be heroes in that situation. And this attribution, fundamental attribution error, is called self-serving bias. Students, we have discussed so far two types of attribution errors, and those are number one, fundamental attribution error, and number two is self-serving bias. As you can see on the slide, fundamental attribution error means that we are attributing failure to external factors. Self-serving bias, we are attributing success to external factors. From this point onwards, let us have our discussion over our understanding of the behaviors that are internally caused or externally caused. We believe that internally caused behaviors are under an individual's control. Externally caused behaviors are motivated by external forces. So, when we say that someone has done something because of his particular intent, then we tend to attribute the entire blame over that person. We would say that this person behaved in this way because this person is actually bad, or this person is actually good, or whatever that person is. However, when we find out that there are reasons for a certain behavior which is externally caused, we attribute the behavior to external factors, and this is the time that we usually try to forgive the people. Let us talk about an example to understand the internal cause and the external cause. मिसाल के तौर पर एक स्टूडेंट है जो क्लास में लेट आए हैं। एक स्टूडेंट ऐसे हैं जो आज क्लास में लेट आए हैं। क्या वो स्टूडेंट क्लास में लेट इस वजह से आए हैं कि वो हैं ही इसी तरह के, या क्या वो क्लास में इस वजह से लेट आए हैं कि शायद कोई उनको प्रॉब्लम हो गई हो। अगर आपने ये डिसाइड करना है कि ब्लेम हम उस स्टूडेंट को दें या ब्लेम हम सिचुएशन को दें जिसकी वजह से वो स्टूडेंट लेट हुआ है, then you probably would need more information about that student. You try to see कि ये स्टूडेंट अगर रोज़ लेट आता है तो शायद ये इसी तरह के शख्स है। अगर इस किस्म की कंसिस्टेंसी पाई जाती है उसके बिहेवियर में, then you would say that this student is late because he is a latecomer, lousy person. लेकिन अगर वो स्टूडेंट रोज़ लेट नहीं आता और सिर्फ आज ही लेट आया है, then you might come to say कि शायद इसको कोई प्रॉब्लम हो गई हो क्योंकि ये रोज़ तो लेट नहीं आता, आज पता नहीं क्यों लेट आया है। So you might come to attribute the cause to the external factors. Now, if you have attributed the cause to the internal factors, how would you behave towards that student? You might start thinking he's a bad, lousy student, and if it is caused by the external factors, then you would give advantage to that student, thinking that he might have bumped into a problem because of which he came late today. So, some of the things are very important for us to determine, and one of the most important things out of these is that when we are trying to find out that the behavior is internally caused or externally caused is distinctiveness. How we determine the source of behavior is determined by three factors. Number one is distinctiveness, number two is consensus, and number three is consistency. Let us see what distinctiveness means. Distinctiveness means that how much a person's behavior is unique, how much a person's behavior is distinctive. Distinctiveness refers to whether an individual displays different behaviors in different situations. अगर इन साहब का behavior मुख्तलिफ situations में different होता है तो आप शायद इन साहब को margin of error देना चाहेंगे और आप ये कहेंगे कि क्योंकि इनका behavior different situations में मुख्तलिफ होता है, मुख्तलिफ situations में, और सिर्फ इसी situation में इस तरह से है, तो then you might come to attribute the cause to the external factors. So if the distinctiveness is high, if the behavior is very, very distinct, then your attribution towards that behavior would be very high towards external factors. If the distinctiveness is low, then your attribution towards the external factor will also be very, very low because this behavior is not distinct at all. Like we discussed in a previous example, if the employee comes late one day, then that behavior is very, very distinctive because it does not happen all the time. If the employee is coming late every day, then that behavior is not distinctive at all because this is something that happens every other day. And if that happens every other day, then that means you might come to say कि ये साहब ही शायद इस तरह से हैं और आप उनके इस बिहेवियर को एट्रीब्यूट करते हैं उनकी इंटरनल कॉज के साथ, और अगर इंटरनल कॉज के साथ एट्रीब्यूट किया, then is this person good or bad? Yeah, like I told you once in our previous lecture that everything that we see in our life, we either say that this is good or this is bad. These are the two basic attitudes that direct us and our perceptions in our life. And based upon the fact that we like something, we would like to learn more about that thing, and if we do not like something, that we would not like to learn more about that particular thing. So if we see that the person's behavior is distinctive, then we may say that this is externally caused. If this person's behavior is not distinctive, we may say it is internally caused. And internally caused means the person is penalized. The next important point is consensus. What does it mean by consensus? If everyone who is faced with a similar situation responds in the same way, we can say the behavior shows consensus. If most of the students in a class, let us say 90% of the students in a class fail in mathematics, who is responsible for that? Is it the students or the teachers? Just make a general understanding about it. Just pass on a judgment right now. 90% of the students in a class fail in mathematics? Is there something wrong with the students, or is there something wrong with the teacher? Based upon the consensus point of view, we will say that since 90% of the students are failing in the class, then that means something is wrong with the teachers, because everyone is failing in this class. Hardly anyone passes. So what are the teachers teaching in this class? Maybe there is something wrong with their teaching methodology. We see a consensus in most people's behavioral patterns, and then we say that this is understandable. You might have heard about a lot of people who come to say that I could not progress in life because I was born in a very poor family and my parents could not actually send me to a good school, and based upon the poverty, I could not progress in life. And then you would say that most of the people who are into poverty actually are not able to progress in life. So, is it the poverty that is responsible for their failure, or is it the people themselves who are responsible for their failures? Who is actually at the helm of the affairs? Poverty or the people themselves? Is it the poverty that makes people fail, or is it the failed people who produce poverty? This is a long debate. However, based upon consensus principle, we might say that this is the poverty that is making those people poor. However, there might be some leaders who might say that this is not the poverty. Another leader might say that it is the people who are responsible because they are poor. Because I was born in the same society, I was born in the same locality, I come from the same country, and I am not poor anymore. I worked hard in my life, and these people who did not work hard in their lives, they are poor. However, if we go by the principle of consensus, we will find out that if the behavioral pattern is common with most people out there, we might say that this behavior is externally caused, this behavior is not internally caused. And external cause of this behavior is poverty, not the people who are actually failing. Students, the next example, the next important concept that we have is consistency. How do we define consistency? When we observe people, we look for consistency in their actions, that people behave the same way in many different situations, that someone's behavior is consistent over time. When someone's behavior is consistent over time, which means किसी बंदे का behavior काफ़ी अरसे से एक ही जैसा है, तो आप शायद ये कहना चाहेंगे कि ये साहब इस वजह से इसलिए बिहेव करते हैं क्योंकि ये हैं ही इसी तरह के, because he is consistently behaving in the same fashion. Let us take the example of a student. There is a student who fails in every class. He has been failing in every class for the last 5 years. He hardly passes in any exam. And every time the exam comes, this student is upset about it because he knows that he's going to fail it. Who do you think is wrong? Is it the student who's wrong, or something happening with the student that's making him do the wrong, which is failing in the exam? Who's wrong here? If we look at the student's behavior, we can say that his behavior is consistent over time. He has been failing for the last 3 years, and there is definitely something wrong with this chap. So you say that this chap is poor. You actually might start commenting upon his intellectual ability, upon his intelligence. You might say so many things in order to find out the reason inside that person. However, let me tell you that most of the great scientists that have a great name in the history were actually bad students, were actually the students who were failing consistently. So based upon this perceptual flaw, we always say that when a person's behavior is consistent over the time period, then that person is responsible. We do not try to find out the reason in the external environments, in the external scenarios. So students, what we have discussed so far is the 3 processes, which are distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. These are the 3 important points of the attribution theory and individual behavior. As you can see, we first of all observe behavior and then we are making interpretations in order to attribute the cause of the behavior to external factors or the internal factors. And the three processes that we discussed are distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. If the distinctiveness is high, then we would attribute the cause to the external factors. If the distinctiveness is low, we will attribute the cause to the internal factors. Similarly, if the consensus is very high, we would attribute the cause to the external factors. And if consensus is low, we will attribute the cause to the internal factors. And same is the case with consistency. If someone's behavior is consistent over a long time period, then we would say that this behavior is caused by the external factors, and in other situations we would say that this behavior is caused by the internal factors. Students, these were the basic points of the attribution theory. At this point, let me also tell you that we make certain shortcuts in making judgments. Now, what are those shortcuts that we make when we are judging people? These are called judgmental shortcuts, and as you can see them on the slide, these are number one, selectivity, assumed similarity, stereotyping, halo effect, and self-fulfilling prophecy. Studying these judgmental shortcuts is very, very interesting in the sense that we understand that most of the times that we are trying to learn about people, we are trying to explain their behavior, then we are making certain shortcuts that help us understand their people. But these shortcuts are not always right. These shortcuts give us extremely misleading information about the people. And since that misleading information is going into our mind, and we are building up our opinions and attitudes accordingly, chances are that we would react to our environment in the negative fashion in the way that is probably not very conducive for our adjustment over there. So students, these processes, these shortcuts of judgment about the people, we will discuss them in our next lecture. For today's lecture, just remember that we have discussed the attribution theory in detail, and in our next lecture we will talk about all of these judgmental shortcuts. I hope that you enjoyed today's lecture, and I look forward to meeting with you in our next lecture. हमारे next lecture में ये judgmental shortcuts के बारे में हम discuss करेंगे, और ये judgmental shortcuts आपको शायद इनको पढ़ने से ये पता चले कि आपकी perception के अंदर क्या basic flaws होते हैं. Usually, this lecture is taken as very, very interesting by the students. अब हमारा वक्त ख़त्म हुआ चाहता है, मुझे इजाज़त दीजिए, अपना ख्याल रखिएगा, अपने दोस्तों का ख्याल रखिएगा, खुश रहिएगा, पढ़ते रहिएगा, और मुझे इजाज़त दीजिए. अल्लाह हाफ़िज़.